"My son is in the emergency room," I texted. "We are busy with Margaret," my mom said. Then she insulted my son, so I canceled their mortgage payments, their car loan, and every one of their credit cards. That was the moment everything changed. After years of being treated like an afterthought in my own family, I finally took control. But to understand how I reached this breaking point, you need to know my story from the beginning. I was 8 years old when my little sister Margaret was born. A difficult pregnancy that nearly killed my mother. Margaret's arrival into this world was celebrated as nothing short of miraculous. My parents never missed an opportunity to remind me how special she was, how she had almost not made it, and how her birth had left my mother unable to have more children. "She's our miracle baby," my mother would say, stroking Margaret's hair while I stood in the doorway, homework in hand, waiting for someone to notice me. At first, I understood. Margaret was tiny and needed extra attention. I was a big girl who could tie her own shoes and make her own sandwiches. But as the years passed, the pattern never changed. The scales never balanced. If anything, they tipped further away from me. By the time Margaret was a toddler, she had become the sun around which our family orbited. My accomplishments were footnotes, hers were headlines. When I brought home a report card with straight A's, my mother would glance at it and say, "That's nice, honey," before returning to whatever Margaret was doing. When Margaret scribbled a drawing that vaguely resembled a house, it was hung on the refrigerator with exclamations of "Look at our little artist." I remember when I won the school spelling bee in 5th grade. I rushed home, trophy in hand, bursting to share my news. I found my parents in the living room, applauding as Margaret stacked blocks. "Mom, Dad, look." I held up my trophy. "In a minute, honey," my father replied, not taking his eyes off Margaret. Margaret just stacked 6 blocks. Can you believe it? 6. I retreated to my room, placing the trophy on my desk where it gathered dust, unmentioned and uncelebrated. My 11th birthday marked the beginning of a tradition that would haunt me for years. My parents had organized a small party at home with a chocolate cake, my favorite. When the time came to blow out the candles, Margaret, then 3, began to cry. "She wants to blow out the candles," my mother explained, as if this were the most natural request in the world. "But it's my birthday," I protested. "Don't be selfish," my father scolded. "She's just a little girl. You're old enough to share." The room fell silent as everyone watched me. I felt the weight of their expectation, the silent demand that I be the bigger person, that I give up this small moment of recognition for my sister's whim. So I did what was expected. I stepped aside and watched as Margaret, hoisted up by my beaming father, blew out my candles. "We'll relight them for you," my mother promised. They did, but by then the moment was ruined. As I blew out my relit candles, no one sang again. There was no anticipation, no specialness. It was merely a formality before we could cut the cake. What hurt most wasn't just losing my moment, it was that no one, not a single family member, stood up for me. My aunts and uncles, my grandparents, they all watched in uncomfortable silence as my birthday was hijacked, likely thinking it was a one-time occurrence to pacify a fussy toddler. Little did they know this would become our new normal. The following year, Margaret didn't even wait to be invited. When my cake appeared, she automatically stepped forward, expectantly. By now, she understood that my birthday was as much hers as it was mine. Perhaps more so. "Let Margaret go first," my mother said, as if this were the established order of things. "But you promised last year was just because she was crying," I reminded her, my voice small. "Don't start," my father warned. "It's not a big deal. You're 12 now, not a baby." That year, I learned to swallow my disappointment. I forced a smile as Margaret blew out my candles and helped herself to the first piece of cake. I pretended not to notice when she opened one of my presents because she'd become bored with the proceedings. But inside, something hardened. A small kernel of resentment took root, one that would grow with each passing year, with each birthday that wasn't truly mine. As Margaret grew older, it became clear that my parents' permissiveness had created a monster. By age 6, she had developed what I can only describe as a princess mentality. Everything was hers by divine right. If she wanted it, she should have it. If she didn't get what she wanted, tantrums ensued. Our home became her kingdom, and I was merely a servant within it. "Get me juice," she would command me, not a question or a request but an order. "Get it yourself," I'd reply, only to find myself in trouble moments later when she complained to our parents. "Why can't you just help your sister?" My mother would sigh, as if I were being unreasonable. "She's just a little girl." But Margaret wasn't so little anymore. She was perfectly capable of pouring her own juice, of picking up her own toys, of doing her own homework. She simply didn't have to because everyone, especially me, was expected to do it for her. She even gave me a nickname, a childish, diminutive version of my name that made my skin crawl. "Hey, Mimi," she'd call, snapping her fingers like I was a dog. "I need you to find my doll." I'd told her countless times not to call me that, but my protests fell on deaf ears. Worse, my parents found it cute that she had a special name for me. "She adores you," my mother insisted. "You should be flattered." But it wasn't flattery, it was ownership. It was her way of reminding me of my place in the hierarchy. As I entered my teens, I retreated further into my room, the only space where I could escape Margaret's demands and my parents' disappointment when I failed to meet them. I installed a lock on my door, leading to a massive argument with my parents. "Why do you need privacy?" my mother demanded. "What are you hiding?" The truth was, I wasn't hiding anything except myself. I needed a sanctuary, a space where I could exist without being ordered around or compared to Margaret. A place where I could just be me. The lock stayed only after an incident where Margaret barged into my room while I was changing. When my parents scolded me for being naked in my own room, I exploded. "Are you serious?" She walked in without knocking. "This is my room." The absurdity was finally clear enough that they backed down, but not without my mother muttering something about teenagers and attitudes. By the time my 18th birthday arrived, I had spent 7 years watching my special day become Margaret's second birthday. 7 years of opening presents only to have some of them earmarked for her. 7 years of cakes I didn't choose, parties at venues she preferred, and candles I wasn't allowed to blow out first. I had graduated high school with B's and C's, not because I wasn't capable of more, but because I had stopped trying to earn the approval and recognition that never came. What was the point of striving when your achievements were barely acknowledged? My parents had taken me out for a graduation dinner at the local Chuck E. Cheese, Margaret's favorite place, naturally. I had wanted to go to the Italian restaurant downtown that I loved, but Margaret had thrown a fit, and as always, Margaret's preferences won. Now, for my 18th birthday, we were back at Chuck E. Cheese. I sat surrounded by screaming children half my age, picking at a mediocre pizza, trying to muster some enthusiasm as I played outdated arcade games for cheap prizes that held no interest for me. "Time for cake," my mother called, gathering everyone around a table. I approached with a sense of déjà vu, already knowing what would happen. But something inside me still hoped that maybe, just maybe, for this milestone birthday, things would be different. Then I saw the cake. It was pink with white flowers. It had my name on it, sure, but it was clearly not a cake for an 18-year-old man. It was the kind of cake you'd get for a little girl. And there were only 10 candles. As my parents lit them, they positioned the cake directly in front of Margaret, who was practically bouncing with excitement. Something inside me snapped. I felt it like a physical breaking, a dam bursting after years of holding back a flood. Tears sprang to my eyes, hot and humiliating, as they streamed down my face. I, an 18-year-old man, was crying in a Chuck E. Cheese, surrounded by my family. The shock on everyone's faces might have been comical if I hadn't been in so much pain. "Why?" I choked out. "Why can't I have one day that's just about me? One birthday that's mine?" I stood up, knocking my chair backward, 8 years of suppressed rage pouring out of me in a torrent of words. Every birthday, every celebration, everything in this family is about her. I pointed at Margaret, who looked stunned. "I haven't had a real birthday since I was 10 years old. Do you have any idea what that feels like? To watch your own birthday be hijacked year after year?" My voice cracked as I continued, "You got me a pink cake with 10 candles for my 18th birthday. Do you even see me at all? Do you even know me?" My father started to rise, his face darkening with anger, but my grandmother put a hand on his arm, stopping him. "And all of you," I swept my arm to include my extended family, "you've sat by and watched this happen for 8 years. Not one of you ever said anything. Not one of you ever stood up for me." I was sobbing now, years of hurt flowing out uncontrollably. There are 365 days in a year. Is it really too much to ask for one of them to be about me? Just one? I turned and walked out, collapsing into a chair next to our family's car, my whole body shaking with sobs. To my surprise, several relatives followed me out. My aunt put her arm around me while my grandparents stood nearby, their faces etched with guilt and concern. "We're so sorry," my grandmother said, her voice trembling. "We didn't realize. We thought you were okay with it because your parents said you were." "I was never okay with it," I said, wiping my face. "They made me go along with it until I just stopped fighting." My father stormed out then, his face red with embarrassment and rage. "What the hell was that?" he demanded. "You've upset your sister and embarrassed your mother. Everyone in there thinks we're terrible parents now. You are terrible parents, I shouted back, beyond caring about consequences. And you know exactly why. What happened next stunned me. My extended family descended on my father like a pack of wolves. Uncles I hadn't seen raise their voices in years were suddenly shouting, aunts were pointing fingers, and my grandfather, the patriarch of our family, stood toe-to-toe with my father, his voice low but deadly serious. Your son is right, I heard him say. What you and your wife have done to this boy is inexcusable. You've treated him like he doesn't matter for years, and we've all let it happen. But it stops today. My grandparents stayed with me while the others went back inside, presumably to confront my mother as well. We sat in their old minivan, where my grandmother held me as I cried, apologizing over and over for not seeing what was happening, for not intervening sooner. About half an hour later, my parents emerged from the restaurant, looking utterly defeated. My mother's eyes were swollen from crying, and neither could look me in the eye. They mumbled awkward apologies and offered to have another party somewhere else, but it was too little, too late. My uncle cleared his throat loudly, and my parents amended their apology, promising they would never again force me to let Margaret blow out my candles or give her presents on my birthday. Another throat clearing prompted them to acknowledge the inappropriate cake, though my mother's explanation that she thought I wouldn't care about the cake at my age only enraged me further. My age has nothing to do with it. I exploded again. You've literally given my birthday to her. And there's no explanation that makes that okay. In the end, I refused their offer of a do-over party. What was the point? 8 years of damage couldn't be undone with a single cake and some hastily purchased gifts. They had shown me exactly where I stood in our family, and no last-minute attempt at damage control could change that. The ride home was silent. My parents' humiliation was palpable, but so was my exhaustion. Years of emotional suppression had erupted in a volcanic display, leaving me drained and empty. Margaret, unsurprisingly, had managed to make even this about herself. While I was outside, she had apparently helped herself to my cake and opened several of my presents. When caught, she'd thrown a massive tantrum, culminating in her hurling my brand new smartphone, the one genuinely nice gift I'd received, against the wall, shattering it beyond repair. My grandparents invited me to stay with them that night, an offer I gratefully accepted. I couldn't face going home, couldn't bear to see Margaret sulking or my mother's tears or my father's stony silence. That night, lying in my grandparents' guest room, I fell asleep to the unfamiliar sound of someone else saying they were sorry for how I'd been treated, for what I'd endured. It was a small comfort, but comfort nonetheless. The following weekend, my grandparents convinced me to attend a make-up dinner they had arranged. Despite my reluctance, I agreed, if only to appease them after all they'd done for me. When we arrived at the restaurant, a real restaurant, not a children's pizza parlor, I was surprised to find another party waiting. There was a chocolate cake with 18 candles and even a banner with my name. My parents stood awkwardly to the side, wearing forced smiles that screamed, "Please don't hate us." I went through the motions, pretending to enjoy myself, but the damage was done. A nice dinner couldn't erase 8 years of being treated as an afterthought. And Margaret's behavior only reinforced my feelings. She sat at the table with her arms crossed and her lower lip jutting out, clearly unhappy that she wasn't the center of attention. When it came time to sing Happy Birthday, they sang a modified version called Happy Day instead. The moment I blew out my candles, Margaret let out an ear-splitting shriek. My parents took her outside, returning with a subdued and sullen Margaret who sat silently pouting for the remainder of the party. I did receive a replacement smartphone, and to my shock, an actual car. It was an old white Volvo that my grandfather had fixed up himself, but to me, it was freedom on 4 wheels. I loved it instantly. Margaret, predictably, threw another tantrum, demanding a car of her own despite being only 10 years old. As my mother escorted her to the bathroom, my father returned looking more defeated than ever. My sister had inadvertently exposed their facade in front of the entire family. Multiple relatives confronted my parents about how they had raised Margaret to be a spoiled princess and warned that she was headed for a life of disappointment and failure if they didn't correct course immediately. I began driving my new car immediately, relishing the independence it provided. But just days later, Margaret took her revenge. I came home from my part-time job to find my car vandalized. Margaret had taken a hammer and smashed 2 side windows and cracked the windshield so badly the car was undrivable. My parents had stopped her before she could do more damage, but not before she'd screamed and tried to bite them when they took the hammer away. The family was in an uproar. My grandparents were furious, especially my grandfather who had put so much work into the car. My parents, finally seeing the monster they had created, were at a loss for how to handle her. For once, Margaret faced real consequences. She was grounded for the remainder of the summer and, when the new school year began, was sent to boarding school. My mother cried like a child herself, but my father stood firm that it was the only way to begin undoing the damage they had caused. Margaret was miserable at the school. She hated the uniforms, the rules, and being held accountable for her behavior. She lied constantly, but with cameras nearly everywhere, she couldn't escape consequences as she had at home. My parents tried to visit her a few times, but she only screamed at them for putting her there. Meanwhile, my parents paid to have my car repaired, hiring an auto glass company to replace the windows and windshield. By August, my grandfather approached me with an offer. He had found me a job working for a friend, but it was 40 miles away, meaning I would need to move out of my parents' house unless I wanted to commute. I was entirely on board with moving out. Finding my first apartment wasn't easy. I had to get approved for a credit card just to be accepted for a studio, but I managed it and have been living on my own since September. My parents continued trying to contact me, but I rarely spoke with them. Whenever we did talk, I felt awkward and uncomfortable. My grandfather suggested they simply couldn't accept their failure as parents and that trying to get me to forgive them would make them feel better about themselves, but I wasn't ready to forgive, not in the near future. I was finally happy and away from them. They had nothing. They didn't have me, and they didn't have Margaret. My parents had to work overtime because the boarding school for Margaret wasn't cheap, not to mention the party they had thrown for me or the repairs to my car. Their house was empty, their relatives angry, and all they had left were their jobs. It felt like terrible misery for me, and I took no joy in it, but it was the result of their own actions. It's been a year since my 18th birthday meltdown at Chuck E. Cheese, and so much has changed. Margaret's behavior only escalated after being sent to boarding school. When her tantrums, lies, and manipulation failed to get her what she wanted, she resorted to a hunger strike. She declared she would refuse to eat anything unless our parents came and took her home. My mother nearly jumped in the car to rescue her precious baby, but my father stood in her way, reminding her that Margaret's behavior was their fault. Her hunger strike didn't even last 2 days before she demanded food in the cafeteria. She wasn't allowed sweets or junk food unless they were healthy, especially after a pediatrician warned my parents that Margaret was at risk for future diabetes and might even be stunted if she didn't control her weight and eat food with proper nutrition, specifically, no more gummy bears on mashed potatoes. Of course, Margaret tried to become a bully to the other girls at boarding school, but they wouldn't tolerate her nonsense. One day she started a fight and was brutally beaten when she was attacked by several girls at once, until a teacher intervened. She wasn't seriously injured, but she was scratched and bruised all over. Naturally, she blamed everyone but herself and actually declared that the other girls should do as she said. They did not. So she was ostracized. I heard she had a pretty big tantrum about that. She had gotten her way with people for so long that mentally, not getting what she wanted was unthinkable. My mother continuously smuggled junk food to Margaret at boarding school, and Margaret was caught with it. My parents had a huge fight about it, but my mother didn't try to smuggle more junk food to her once it was exposed. Margaret was and still is a junk food addict. Yes, she's barely changed in the past year. Is anyone among you really surprised? I'm not. She's just a little better about occasionally accepting that she's not the center of the universe. Her plots to escape boarding school only escalated. After just a few months there, she resorted to self-harm to try to get her way. She somehow got hold of a knife from the cafeteria and stood on a table threatening to hurt herself unless they gave her candy and sent her home. Yes, she didn't just demand to be sent home, she wanted candy too. I mentioned before that I'd seen her put gummy bears on mashed potatoes. Her favorite thing to put gummy bears on was food she didn't like because it was the only way my parents could get her to eat it. Can you imagine gummy bears on salad? It rather defeats the purpose of a salad, but she routinely brought a bag of gummy bears to the table when we ate. Margaret was given whatever sweets they could find while they tried to talk her down, but at some point, she slipped and fell off the table. The fall resulted in a broken left arm, collarbone, and she got a concussion from hitting her forehead. At this point, even the boarding school had had enough of her and didn't want her to return after she left the hospital. In fact, her self-harm attempt only landed her somewhere worse, a psychiatric ward for children. She was forced into psychological treatment and diagnosed with a severe case of narcissism that she had been nurtured into having. She couldn't leave the psychiatric ward unless my parents took her out. They also forced her to continue her education from there and kept her on a very strict healthy diet. It could be described simply as her personal hell. My mother wanted to go to the psychiatric ward and take her precious baby out, but she and my father had a huge fight about it, and in the fight, she hit him with the closest thing she could grab, which happened to be a bottle on the kitchen counter. The bottle broke against his face, fracturing his cheekbone and cutting him pretty badly. The police were called and he had to be taken to the hospital while my mother had to be driven away in a police car. My mother ended up being psychologically evaluated and detained for a few months, and she was forced to face her own powerful urges to indulge Margaret. It turns out it stemmed from serious mental trauma that my mother had from her own childhood, but nobody else knows or would tell me much more than that. There have been and still are rumors of a future divorce from my parents, but neither has gone beyond sleeping in separate bedrooms so far. As for me, my 19th birthday wasn't long ago. My grandparents threw me a party at a restaurant they knew I liked. My parents attended, and so did Margaret. She was allowed a brief time out of the psychiatric ward, and I could see the pure bitterness in her eyes. She sat there looking like she did before, lower lip sticking out and glaring at me like she wanted me to burst into flames. She had lost a bit of weight because she hadn't been allowed junk food in a long time, and her diet plan would continue for quite a while longer. In fact, the junk food from my birthday party was the first she'd had in a long time, but she still couldn't stand not being the center of attention. This time when I blew out the candles, she didn't shriek. Instead, she started ugly crying. I can tell you right now that this was just another manipulation from her. She just cried and said why over and over again. I know she's only 10, but remember last year she was 9 and demanding a car of her own just because I was given one at 18. She can't even get a learner's permit until she's 15. At my 19th birthday, Margaret laid down on the floor to tantrum that there was no pizza, no presents for her, no prizes, nothing. Then she started cursing at our parents before trying to storm out of the restaurant. She was basically trying to copy what I had done last year in her own twisted way. You could say I'm reading too much into it, but I know my sister, and if she thinks doing something will get her what she wants, she'll do it. My parents just apologized to everyone and then took Margaret home early, but not before my grandfather went over to talk to them. I got some details from my grandmother afterward. He told them they'd better not take Margaret to a party elsewhere or give her what she wanted because this would never end if they didn't stop it once and for all. Afterward, Margaret was dragged out kicking and screaming because she heard the whole thing and realized her tantrums weren't working. She was taken back to the psychiatric ward the next morning, and that's where she is now. I don't know how much longer she'll be there. She's just a child, but she's the most stubborn child I've ever seen. She probably won't change until she hits rock bottom, and until then she'll be stuck in a place that doesn't cater to her demands. No one, not even my parents, has tried to lay any blame for Margaret's actions in the past year on me. They've had to accept that I am not at fault in this, and they raised Margaret to be a narcissist, and indulging a narcissist is also an addiction. From what I've seen and heard, Margaret hasn't been diagnosed with any mental illness besides narcissism. In fact, she's smarter than I am from what I've heard. She tested to have an IQ of around 110. She just doesn't like applying herself unless there's some kind of reward for her. She was raised this way, and I guess it will take many years to make her better. As for me, I'm doing well for myself. I admit I had to learn how to budget properly and take care of all my essential needs myself. It's not easy being an adult, but it's still 1,000 times better than the life I lived with my parents and sister. It's strange to look back on everything that's happened. My life changed completely on that day in Chuck E. Cheese when I finally stood up for myself. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had spoken up sooner, if I hadn't swallowed my hurt year after year. But then, would anyone have listened? It took a public meltdown on my 18th birthday for my family to finally see what had been happening right in front of them. Margaret is still in the psychiatric ward. The doctors believe she has narcissistic personality disorder, though they can't officially diagnose that until she's an adult. What they can say is that she displays all the warning signs, and it's entirely the result of how my parents raised her. My mother, now on medication for her own psychological issues, visits her weekly. My father goes less often. I visit my grandparents regularly. They've become my real family, the people I turn to when I need advice or just want to share good news. They've apologized countless times for not stepping in sooner, and while part of me still resents that it took 8 years for anyone to notice what was happening, I've chosen to focus on the present, on the relationship we're building now. My parents and I have what you might call a cordial relationship. We exchange pleasantries at family gatherings, but there's no real warmth, no closeness. They've tried to reach out multiple times, especially my mother, but I'm not ready for that kind of relationship with them. I'm not sure I ever will be. Sometimes I think about Margaret and feel a twinge of pity. She's a product of my parents' terrible parenting, just as I am. The difference is that I was neglected, while she was ruined by overindulgence. Neither of us got what we needed: appropriate love, boundaries, guidance. We both suffered, just in different ways. But I'm building my own life now, one where I matter, where my feelings are valid, where I don't have to shrink myself to make room for someone else. I have my own apartment, a job I enjoy, and the beginnings of a healthy social life. I celebrate my birthday when and how I want, with people who genuinely care about me. And every year, when I blow out my candles, I make the same wish, that I'll continue to grow stronger, to heal from the wounds of my childhood, and to build a life where I'm never invisible again. It's working so far.